Welcome to this latest personal pondering in the Psalms, and let me take a moment, as I do just from time to time, to remind you these are not meant to be detailed expositions of any of the Psalms. I'm not attempting in any way to cover every verse or every word or even every truth contained in them. I just want to introduce you to the Psalms and bring out perhaps the main themes, especially often by showing you the structure or the argument contained within that psalm. It's meant to be a devotional introduction rather than a detailed exposition. And today we're looking at Psalm 41. One of the things that fascinates me more and more as I study the Bible is the interconnectedness and interdependence between the Old and the New Testament. How often the New, as we know, draws on the Old. But we have a fascinating example here in Psalm 41 where David almost paraphrases something that Jesus is going to say 1,000 years in the future. Do you remember how in Matthew 5, as part of the Beatitudes, Jesus says, "Blessed are the merciful, for they shall receive mercy." Isn't that what David is saying in the first verse of this psalm? Blessed is the one who considers the poor. In the day of trouble, the Lord delivers him. So David is establishing a principle here that he knows about God. God is a God who blesses and favors those who behave in a certain way. So let me divide the psalm up very simply. Verses 1 to 3, David expresses a principle. And in verses 4 to 13, David expresses a prayer. And in these first three verses, he establishes 7 things about God, about the way that God deals with people who live in a certain way that's pleasing to him. He says that God will deliver them, God will protect them, God will keep them alive, God will bless them in the land, God will not give them up to the will of their enemies, God will sustain them, and that God will restore them from sickness. So David lays that out, as it were. That's the theology on which he's operating. That's the God in which he believes. Then from verses 4 to 13, he bases his prayer on that theology. Friends, that's a great example, isn't it? We come to God and we bring our prayers based on what we know has been revealed about God, based on his character and his track record of dealing with people. So David now says in verses 4 to 13, okay, God, now apply this to me. Apply this to me. Treat me in this particular way, because that's the way you deal with your children. And David is facing 2 really serious dilemmas. He's facing what appears to be a very serious illness, and he's facing some very vindictive, aggressive enemies. Now, there's possibly a connection between the two. It may actually be that his illness is caused by the vindictiveness of his enemies. And that happens, doesn't it? When people attack us and we're assaulted in that particular way, it can lead to all sorts of illness. On the other hand, it may be that David is ill and physically ill, and his enemies are delighting in that and mocking him for his weakness and maligning God and saying God can't look after him and God can't protect him and God can't deliver him. In fact, we're told quite a lot of things about these enemies. Notice in verse 5, they're willing David to die. They want him not to recover. They want to see him die. In verse 6, they're saying one thing to his face. They're telling him they're concerned about him and compassionate towards him, but then they're saying something else behind his back towards others. And in verses 7 to 8, they're actually saying that his illness is directly connected and a consequence of his great sin. You don't need enemies like that, do you? Well, that's what David is facing. He's facing this great twofold dilemma. So he prays to God. And he says in verse 4, heal me, be gracious to me. That's a prayer he prays twice. Once in verse 4 and again in verse 10. Be gracious to me and heal me, for I have sinned against you. So he's praying for healing. Now the word that's used here is an interesting word. It can mean physical healing, but it usually means spiritual healing. But of course the truth is often those two things go together. Some of our sicknesses are caused by our sins. Not all. We need to be careful about that. Sickness often comes just because we're living in a fallen world. But some sickness is caused by sin. But even when it's not, some sickness can lead us to spiritual malaise and illness, because we're so holistically made by God that we're interconnected in that way. So whatever David really means, and whatever's the priority in his life, I think we can say that he's praying for both spiritual and physical healing. And the reason he's praying for that is that his enemies will not have cause to rejoice in his downfall and to mock God for being unable, as they see it, to protect and deliver his own child. So the principle is that God deals favorably with his people. The prayer is, now God, do it for me. The Lord bless you and keep you.